let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live. We're talking about today's hottest topics on policy, faith, the culture, all of it from a biblical, very important biblical perspective, historical perspective, and a constitutional perspective. We're here with David Barton. He's America's premier historian and our founder here at WallBuilders. Tim Barton is a national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And my name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator. You can find out more about all three of us at our website, wallbuilderslive.com. It's a great website to check out. You can get archives of the program over the last few weeks, and you can make a contribution there. That's a great place to invest in freedom. When you donate to WallBuilders Live, you help amplify our voice, and we need a voice of truth in the culture right now more than ever. David, Tim, it is Inauguration Day. A good day for us to be thinking biblically, thinking constitutionally, and, of course, thinking historically. Not the Inauguration Day we were all wanting, and I bet a lot of our listeners today are struggling with, man, how do I have joy in the midst of trials like we're told in James when I'm watching this inauguration and thinking, oh boy, what's coming from the federal government?
Well, one of the things I think, as you brought up James, I'm very glad you did, the perspective of James is that you consider pure joy because you know that God is developing, God is working, God is doing something. And so it's not joy in the moment of tough, sorrow, frustration, loss, hurt, pain. It's joy knowing that God has not abandoned you, that God still has a plan and purpose, that God is going to develop you in the midst of this. And so certainly as we are looking at our nation, recognizing that, man, we really had hoped and thought there would be a different outcome. Certainly as we looked at some of these states and you saw what certainly appeared to be a lot of fraudulent behavior, and you thought this is going to get exposed and it's all going to get turned around. And now it seems like on some level there was some wishful thinking, even though certainly a lot of these states need to go back and reevaluate how they do elections. There certainly are things that need to be corrected and fixed, kind of big picture across the board. But in the midst of this, the reason we can take joy is knowing that God has not abandoned and forsaken us. And one of the things to me that is affirmation of that is you are seeing a lot of people who are feeling a call from God, an awakening, saying, I got to get involved. I have to do something. I need to make a difference. And we're seeing this from frankly, some people who were just elected to Congress, some people who are actually in Washington, D.C. right now, people who are a part of the political process, but we're seeing this from pastors and from business leaders, from different Christians in the community. And when God is stirring and waking people up, you can know that God is not done. In fact, God is on the move, about to do something great.
Well, and using the verse that Tim had, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, when things are not going well. And if you remember Jesus and the apostles or the disciples at that point in time, they were absolutely convinced that Jesus had come to give them a political victory. They saw him as the Messiah, and to them that meant that he's going to deliver us from Roman rule. We're going to have a change of political system here. It's no longer going to be what it's been. And that's not what it all worked out. I mean, that wasn't even close to that. And so as Jesus told them is, hey, let not your heart be troubled. This is not going where you thought it was going to go. That's all right. And quite frankly, we're in a position where that hopefully we can take that frustration or disappointment or whatever and channel that into some very positive, very constructive things that we can do. I mean, the disciples didn't get what they wanted, but you know what? They dug in and did something else that changed the entire world. I mean, we would not be Christians today had they not done, if they had thrown their hands up and said, this didn't turn out the way I wanted, I'm leaving, we wouldn't have Christianity. They dug in and had a real purpose for what they did.
And let's clarify, the initial moment where we could say the disciples didn't get what they wanted was when Jesus was being crucified. And yet perspective, you can look back and go, but that was one of the best things that ever could have happened, right? This was such a significant pivotal moment in God's sovereign plan, but even go forward. So Jesus was resurrected and he walked among them and miracles were still done and more than 500 people saw him and all this that happens. And then you have the birth of the early church and the Holy Spirit comes and all this stuff happens, and the disciples in their life in some pretty fierce ways. And so you're going, wait a second, right? You thought you had this bad moment. Jesus died, but then he's resurrected and he's defeated death, hell, and the grave. And now we have this glorious moment again, only for you to endure great persecution, for, right, pretty much all the disciples to die a martyr's death. And I'm saying pretty much all because John, they tried to make him die a martyr's death on many occasions. He just had this weird thing that he wouldn't die.
Yeah, how many people actually survive being boiled in oil? Probably a handful.
I'm going to say that number's really low, if any. And I'm sure I don't want to test that experiment, right? Like, no,
Right.
I don't want to know any of that. But the reality is, in the midst of persecution, one of the things that has consistently, historically, biblically been true is that in the midst of this persecution, not only does God bring this cleansing about the church, right? Kind of like the gold that is tested and the purity rises. It's something to be said that when you look at persecution, there is a growth of Christianity because the sincerity of the belief of what it is, that you can't be a casual Christian, that no, being a Christian, if you read scripture, being a Christian, there was always a cost. It always was going to cost you something. And we have lived so long in America in the political protections of Christianity, which, by the way, I'm grateful for, and I want to restore that in America, where that Christianity, the morals, the values of Christianity are so respected, are so embraced, that it is a cultural appreciation for that behavior. I want America to recover that and get back to that place. But the reality is, historically and biblically, that's just not the way it always is. And so this is something that certainly, as we look at what's happening in the nation, we could say that on a spiritual perspective, we think there's probably some purging going on where there's a refining fire, where God is doing something inside the church. Maybe there's some winnowing, there's some separating the sheep and the goats, there's dividing of the wheat and the chaff. But in the midst of this, it certainly is a time that even though things are not going exactly as we wanted, we can rest in the fact that God is still in control, that he is sovereign, that he has a plan, and that his plan will ultimately be the best thing for his kingdom and the part we're going to play in what happens in that kingdom going forward.
You know, guys, as we're going to break, I'm just thinking, tough times, I mean, they often are needed for us to acknowledge exactly what you just said, Tim, to realize how blessed we've been to have those religious freedoms. And David, I remember you saying just a few weeks ago, we don't know what God's doing here. We don't know how he's moving these pieces together. And I remember you saying that 4 years ago, actually 4.5 years ago, when I was having such a hard time with Trump being the Republican nominee and thinking, man, the country's ruined. This guy's going to be awful. And what a blessing he turned out to be and how God used him. So I'm not suggesting that's going to happen with Biden. I'm just saying you were right 4.5 years ago when you said, Rick, we don't know what God's doing. We don't know how he might use this guy or what it might do to our country to wake us up. In the same way right now, we don't know for sure what God's doing. All the things y'all just said, absolutely true, and he can move in mighty ways, even in the tough times. When we come back from break, let's talk about some of the things that aren't tough, the great victories that happened on November 3rd. Let's not get so caught up in this presidential race that we forget that actually the tide and the shift was in the right direction during this election. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is Tim Barton from WallBuilders with another moment from American history. American patriot Paul Revere rode to alert Americans of the impending arrival of the British, but he also sought patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock to warn them that the British were seeking their execution. Adams and Hancock were staying with the Reverend Jonas Clark in Lexington. When they asked Pastor Clark if his church was ready for the approaching British, he replied, "I've trained them for this very hour. They will fight, and if need be, die under the shadow of the house of God." Later that morning, 70 men from his church faced several hundred British in the first battle of the War for Independence. As Pastor Clark affirmed, the militia that morning were the same who filled the pews of the church meeting house on the Sunday morning before. The American church was regularly at the forefront of the fight for liberty. For more information on this pastor and other colonial patriots, go to wallbuilders.com.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. It's Inauguration Day here in America, the peaceful transfer of power. One of the beautiful things about America, even when it's being transferred to someone you may not have supported and a party that you may not be excited about. But we said as we were going to break, let's not forget the good stuff, too. November 3rd was a great victory across the country with congressional races we weren't supposed to win, literally dozens of them, Senate races we weren't supposed to win, state legislative races, literally more than 100 of those that flipped. So a lot of good stuff happened. The tide of the country is in the right direction. Federal government's going to be really weird here for the next couple of years, but just don't give up hope and don't lose sight of the good stuff that's been happening as well.
Yeah, and guys, in the midst of recognizing that there was a lot of really positive things, in the midst of recognizing there's also some things that we are not excited about, one of the things I'm reminded of is when Jeremiah, who was in the Bible, he was a prophet in the Bible, he was part of when Israel fell. Israel was conquered, their nation was largely destroyed, he was taken into captivity, and I'm not suggesting, right, that that's the same scenario here with Biden, but the attitude that God told him in Jeremiah 29, he said that you need to seek the peace of the land into which you are going as a captive, as an exile, as a slave. You need to seek good for that land. He says, actually pray to the Lord for it. For when it goes well with the land, it will go well with you. And I'm reminded that even though certainly Biden is not the guy that probably many of us wanted to be there, that probably not many of us listening voted for, yet because he is there, we also recognize one of the things that Paul told Timothy is that you need to pray, first of all, for kings, for these government officials and leaders. And so we need to remember as Christians that whether or not this is the leader we wanted or not, we have been called as Christians to pray for our leaders. And so we need to be praying for Joe Biden, that God would have his hand on Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden is not where he needs to be with God, which there's some arguments to be made that he probably is not based on some positions that he holds, because you can judge a tree by the fruit, and the fruit of supporting some of these abortion on demand, some of these things that are, transgender bathrooms, whatever else. There's some things that don't seem to line up with biblical Christianity. So maybe we can say he doesn't look like he's probably in a biblical position. Then we need to pray that God opens his eyes, that God works on his heart, that he is this encounter with God, this revelation. He needs to be part of our prayer. The same thing with Kamala Harris or Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, any of these people in Congress. We need to be praying for them. And it's not something that we should take flippantly, because we've been challenged by God. This is what we learn in Scripture, that we need to pray for that. And also what God told Jeremiah, you need to be praying for the good of your nation, because when it goes well with your nation, then it will go well for you. And we want America to continue to enjoy blessings and prosperity and stability. But that means that we have to have things go the right direction. So we need to be praying that God uses those leaders to take it the right direction, and that God would help them have this revelation, this change of heart, whatever is needed. But I would just encourage us, make sure that we are praying for those leaders in the midst of what's going on.
And I would add to that oftentimes when you get discouraged, you don't want to pray anymore. You just kind of sit around and mope and whatnot. But remember that verse that Tim mentioned, pray first of all for leaders and those in authority. The leaders that were there at the time that Paul told Timothy that were not the good leaders. They were not the ones that Paul would have chosen. They were opponents to many of the things that God's people stood for. They were opponents to many of God's people. And Paul still said, first of all, pray for kings and those in authority. And so this really is a time that you can put application to that verse. It's easy to pray for leaders when you like the leaders and everything is the way you want it to be. But that's not the situation in which Paul told Timothy to pray for leaders and those in authority. So this is a really good time to put biblical application to it. It's really when character shows is in the tougher times. And this is a time to show spiritual character. This is a time to step up and do the right thing, even if you don't feel like it, even if you feel quasi-depressed, shake it off, do the right thing, understand that God still has stuff in his control. This did not catch him by surprise. And, who knows? Maybe we're going to see something different in 2 years. I remember the verse where one of the prophets says, God is going to shake you out of your complacency. So, maybe this is not what we want for the next 2 years, but maybe it wakes the nation up. Who knows? That's all speculation. And then again, maybe Biden turns out to be so much better than what maybe his party is planning on him doing a lot of things for them, and maybe he doesn't. We don't know how this is going to work out. So don't predict what God's going to do, because we can't see the end from the beginning. He can. But in the meantime, we pray diligently, and first of all, for our leaders and those in authority.
Well, I have to say, I'm so glad he's in charge and not me, because had I had my way 4.5 years ago, Donald Trump would not have been president, and we would have missed out on all the blessings and positive progress that took place. Let's take a quick break, guys. We'll be right back. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution, but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. And it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com. We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. It's Inauguration Day, and as they have the virtual inauguration in Washington, D.C., I did notice, guys, last night, President Trump gave a farewell address, very optimistic, very, very positive, very much like what we're talking about today. I was just going to read one quote from what he said. He said, "We are and must always be a land of hope, of light, and of glory to the world. This week we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success." Tim, just like you said, pray for its success and keeping America safe and prosperous. He said, "We restored the idea that in America no one is forgotten because everyone matters and everyone has a voice." So some optimistic words there, even from President Trump as the administration changes hands. Guys, we were talking about, we don't know for sure what God's doing, but we do know that he commands us to be active and to continue with our hand to the plow and to do our duty regardless. We've been saying this for months, right? No matter how this whole thing turns out, our duty's not really going to change in 2021. We're still expected to be good citizens, still expected to apply biblical wisdom to the issues of life.
And this is a great opportunity for us in so many ways. I mean, for us here at WallBuilders, quite frankly, the election did not change anything we do. We're still going to be working to get people engaged, to train people, to teach people, to help them be knowledgeable. Tim and I, over the last couple of days, have been on so many calls with leaders and elected officials. There's so much going on that needs a lot of attention and a lot of work.
Well, and let me specify, it didn't change the philosophy of what we do. There's some things that might be different because, for example, we normally do pastors' briefings at the Capitol building throughout the year. And it looks like that Nancy Pelosi might keep, and now obviously we're speculating because we don't know yet, but Joe Biden's talked about having national lockdowns, and Nancy Pelosi has largely been in favor of masks and lockdowns unless she needs a haircut. But that's different, right? Because that's for her. But there are some things that certainly could be different for us going forward, but our philosophy has not changed. And our fundamental values of what we are fighting for, what we know that God has called us to do, none of that calling has changed. Certainly, in the midst of this pandemic, we've done a lot more Zooms than we've ever cared to do probably in our whole life, and probably going forward, we're going to do a lot more Zoom meetings. We're going to do a lot of Zoom conferences and a lot of conversations, and that's okay. Actually, there's some positives even in that because, Rick, we got to be with you just last week on, actually, no, it was earlier this week, on your biblical citizenship course that's being offered online. And man, you had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people sign up for that. So we're able on some of these levels to reach people on greater levels than we have before. So there certainly is good in the midst of it. But that's your point. Our philosophy and our calling has not changed. It's just that we've had to navigate some of the differences going on. But bottom line, no, it doesn't matter who's in office. We know what God's called us to do, and we're doing that regardless and sometimes in spite of who the political leaders might be.
And so what we've seen is we've seen, for example, state legislators that have created new committees for the state, and they're 10th Amendment committees. And the reason that's significant is 10th Amendment says, look, the federal government can only do the enumerated items in the Constitution, the 17 things. Past that, federal government's not supposed to get involved in running the states. They can do their 17 things. And so states now see that, there's going to be an attempt to do a lot more federal intrusion, and we're not going to do that. We're going to draw the line where the Constitution says. And so what we're seeing is people willing to stand more and defend the Constitution, being willing to actually kind of try to enforce the Constitution. Those are good things. And at the same time, even before the election happened, in the educational arena, the left was really aggressively moving forward. And now we've talked to a lot of legislators and a lot of even professors and others who are saying, okay, we got to keep education from going further left. So there's more of a will to work right now. And it's interesting that it's caused because of this thing didn't turn out the way we thought it would. So we're going to have to stand and resist a little harder. We're going to have to hold our ground with a little more firmness. And this is a great opportunity to stand up for those values. And by the way, here's something else to think about. We fully expect out of D.C. that if Biden administration does what over the last 2 weeks they say they're going to do, there's going to be a lot more adverse things coming down, anti-constitutional, anti-moral, anti-religious, anti-all sorts of stuff. And there's going to be a lot of advocating for bad positions, and the national media is going to be on board with this. I mean, they're going to be pushing this stuff, and they're going to push that narrative. This is a great opportunity for you to be a vaccination for someone else. And I say that in the sense, when this bad stuff comes down, go find someone and say, hey, do you know what you just heard there on radio? That's really not true. And here's why. This is a great opportunity for us to teach and mentor and help people understand, help them have some discernment, and help them be able to judge things that come down, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, this is one of the greatest opportunities we've had in a while to be able to actually mentor people and help them grow. And we shouldn't let that pass by. This is, again, a great time for you to be a vaccination, an inoculation against someone going further left by helping teach them and get them in the right direction, showing them the right principles out of the Bible and out of the Constitution.
One more break, guys, and as we go to break, exactly, Tim, you're right. So many thousands of people have signed up for these classes, the opportunity for people to spread truth. It really is a great opportunity to be that voice of reason and truth in people's lives. And as David's saying, vaccinate them and help make them immune to the lies out there and the deception. And so we've each got to let our voices be heard. God's blessed us with a system where we can do that. And yeah, free speech feels really weird right now out there in the marketplace and even with some of the government reactions. But man, what a even more important time to stand up and speak truth. So you be that voice in your community. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, we want to let you know about a new resource we have at WallBuilders called The American Story. For so many years, people have asked us to do a history book to help tell more of the story that's just not known or not told today, and we would say very providentially in the midst of all of the new attacks coming out against America, whether it be from things like the 1619 Project that say America is evil and everything in America was built off slavery, which is certainly not true, or things like even the Black Lives Matter movement, the organization itself, not the statement Black Lives Matter, but the organization that says we're against everything that America was built on, and this is part of the Marxist ideology. There's so many things attacking America. Well, is America worth defending? What is a true story of America? We actually have written and told that story, starting with Christopher Columbus, going roughly through Abraham Lincoln. We tell the story of America not as the story of a perfect nation or a perfect people, but the story of how God used these imperfect people and did great things through this nation. It's a story you want to check out. WallBuilders.com, The American Story.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live, final segment of the day, Inauguration Day today. We've been talking about things we can still do, obviously, in the culture. And I kind of taken from what you guys are saying today and what I've been feeling and thinking is there's probably more we can do now than in the past because, frankly, the fields are fertile. People are paying attention to the things we've been doing for decades. Some people paying attention to this for the first time. What an opportunity.
Well, for definite sure, you cannot let your frustration drive you in the wrong direction. And you can't let it make you bitter. We're told in the Bible that the root of bitterness defiles many others. And if you get that root of bitterness in you and you're really bitter at the way things turned out and that the cheating that happened or the fraud, you can't do that. You have to shake that off. You have to be willing to forgive and move on and build positive things. And so you don't want to infect other people with bitterness because that's what bitterness does. It infects others. And when you get bitter and angry, you can't win people. You can't persuade them. You can't move them the right direction. So you take this as a learning opportunity to say, this is a great opportunity for us to reach out to people who weren't thinking correctly on this, who weren't thinking biblically, constitutionally. This is a great opportunity to create relationships and start doing things. And this is a great opportunity to start creating some small groups. Now, Rick, you got a really big group going of 10,000 or more. But this is an opportunity to get some of your friends together and pray with them and talk about things with them and look at Bible verses or constitutional phrases or talk about news stories. We're seeing an explosion across America right now of a movement called home churches, where the churches are popping up in homes and they're talking about very practical things. Well, that's something we can do on a constitutional and biblical level as well, is get those small groups going, because that is what will make America healthy again. And we talked about it in previous programs, but start looking for people to run for school board and to run and do things in the local level. Look for people for city council and look for things that you can get your teachers in your schools and help them understand better. There's just so many opportunities. Don't get frustrated by looking at what happened nationally and get yourself uninvolved locally. You got to stay involved. You got to engage. And there's going to be more low-hanging fruit now to deal with than we've had in a good while. Take that as something joyful, as something good, as an opportunity, and have the right attitude and go at it the right way.
Yeah, and you're right, David. Those small groups, that's where you really find hope anyway. Because that's where you get the fellowship. That's where you really get that iron sharpening with each other. It's really the biblical model, and it's a beautiful thing to see it happening. People are getting together in their living rooms or at community centers or wherever they can, and just simply talking about the issues of the day and saying, what can we do with regard to biblical instruction on this? What's the Bible say about this, and how do we apply that in our local communities? So it's a great way to go into 2021, finding folks that you can have that fellowship with and sharing those ideas. And of course, we'll equip you with all the tools if you want to host this biblical citizenship class. So also want to second what you said about running for school board. In fact, I just got a text from one of our good friends out in California who's on the school board there, and just in the last 48 hours, guys, he was texting me going, man, they're pushing the 1619 project stuff. Help me out. Give me some stuff. I sent him, sent him the link to y'all's book and the American Story and some of the videos you made with the one-room schoolhouse. And I mean, he got on it and he just texted me and said, hey, I used everything you sent me and we defeated it. They pulled that stuff off the website. We're going to have a much deeper discussion. I mean, guys, that's California. I mean, come on. We can win these battles. We just got to be faithful. And Tim, you've been saying it all year long. We hadn't been called to be the good and successful, but the good and faithful servant. Let's do that, folks. Let's all be faithful where we've been planted. Do your part. Go to wallbuilderslive.com today to learn more. We appreciate you listening to Wallbuilders Live.
We stand under